You've been sitting across from someone, completely convinced they were into you. The conversation flowed. She laughed at everything. She kept the interaction going, and then silence. No text, no follow-up, nothing. And the worst part isn't that she disappeared. The worst part is you didn't see it coming. You replayed every moment, every word, every signal, and you still couldn't figure out where you went wrong. Here's what nobody told you. You weren't reading her. You were hoping, and hope is the most expensive mistake a man can make. Most men walk into every interaction completely blind, not because they lack confidence, not because they said the wrong thing, but because they were never taught how to actually see people. Not what they say, not what they perform, what they reveal. Subscribe right now, because in this video I'm going to show you 5 specific behavioral signals that tell you exactly where someone stands before they say a word, before they even know themselves. And once you see them, you'll never be blindsided again. There's a man. Let's call him Daniel. Daniel wasn't the guy who struggled to talk to women. He was funny, warm, the kind of man who made people feel comfortable within minutes. He could hold a conversation, read the room, make her laugh without trying too hard. Women liked being around him. That part was never the problem. The problem came 3 weeks in. Every time, he'd be deep in what felt like something real. The long conversations late into the night, the inside jokes that built up naturally, the easy comfort of someone who felt familiar fast. He'd start thinking this one was different, that something was actually building, and then she'd say it. "I just don't feel that way about you." And Daniel would be standing there completely blindsided, trying to reconstruct every moment, looking for the thing he missed. He never found it, because he was looking in the wrong place. It kept happening. Different women, same conversation, same ending. And after a while, Daniel did what most men do. He started turning it inward, telling himself it was something fundamental, his looks, his career, something broken in him that he couldn't identify or fix. That kind of thinking is a trap, and it's one most men fall into without realizing it, because it feels like self-awareness when it's actually just self-punishment dressed up as reflection. The real problem had nothing to do with who Daniel was. It had everything to do with what he was reading. Every interaction, Daniel was tracking content, what she said, how often she laughed, whether she kept the conversation going or let it die. He was treating words like evidence, building a case for whether she was interested based on the things she chose to communicate. And here's the thing, nobody tells you about that system. It's completely unreliable, not because people lie, though they do, but because words are the most curated part of any person. By the time something becomes a sentence, it's been filtered, softened, shaped to fit the social situation. People choose their words consciously. They manage their tone. They've practiced their smile since childhood. They know how to seem engaged even when they're not, how to seem warm without being open, how to give you enough to keep you around without ever actually letting you in. You cannot read someone through the version of themselves they've prepared for you. I used to do the exact same thing. I'd leave a conversation running a full replay in my head. What she said, what I said, what her response meant, what I should have said instead. I thought I was being observant. I thought I was reading people. But I was just analyzing a performance. I was studying the edited version and calling it insight. The real information was never in the words. It was in everything happening underneath them, in the half second before the performance kicked in the movements and adjustments that no one thinks to conceal because no one realizes they're revealing anything. Behavior is different from content in one critical way. It's automatic. Behavior runs on a system that's older than language, older than social conditioning, older than whatever she decided to present to you when she walked through the door that night. It doesn't wait for approval from the conscious mind. It just moves. The way a body orients itself in a room, the timing of a reaction, the small physical adjustments that happen before anyone has thought about making them. These aren't things people manage because they don't know they're happening. That's the original signal. and almost no one is reading it. Daniel was completely fluent in the performance. He could decode a sentence, track a tone shift, notice when the energy of a conversation changed. But he had no idea the raw feed even existed. He didn't know there was a layer underneath everything being said where the actual truth was running continuously, unedited, available to anyone paying the right kind of attention. Most guys don't realize this. The conversation you're having out loud is almost never the most important one. The one that matters is the one happening in the body, in the space, in the timing of things. And that one doesn't lie. Once Daniel understood this, something shifted. Not in how he talked, not in what he said or how he carried himself, but in where he put his attention. He stopped trying to decode her words and started watching what she did when she wasn't thinking about being watched. The moments between sentences, the way she moved when the conversation changed direction, the small involuntary things that no one performs because no one thinks to. And what he found was uncomfortable at first, because some of the women he'd been certain were interested, the ones who laughed the hardest, who kept the conversation going the longest, who said all the right things, their behavior told a completely different story. And some of the ones he'd been less sure about told a different story too, in the other direction. He hadn't been misreading people because he lacked awareness. He'd been misreading them because he was reading the wrong signal entirely. The shift is simple to say and takes real practice to do. Stop listening for what she's telling you. Start watching what she's showing you when she doesn't realize she's showing you anything. That's where the truth lives. And the first place it shows up, before a word is spoken, before a feeling is named, is in something so small, most men walk right past it every single time. The body votes before the mind does. That's not a metaphor. That's biology. Before she's decided how she feels about you, before she's had a single conscious thought about the interaction, her body has already registered a verdict. And it expresses that verdict in movement. Small movement. The kind most men are too busy performing to notice. Daniel learned this the hard way. He'd been in a conversation for nearly 2 hours with a woman he was certain was interested. She was engaged, responsive, laughing at the right moments. He went home feeling good about it. Nothing came of it. And when he replayed it later, he realized something that stopped him cold. She hadn't moved once. For 2 hours, she sat in exactly the same position she'd started in. Polite, present, perfectly still. That stillness was the signal. He just didn't know how to read it yet. Here's what you need to understand about proximity. Where someone sits when they first sit down means almost nothing. That's a choice. It's managed. People decide where to position themselves consciously with full social awareness. What they cannot manage, what nobody manages because nobody thinks to, is where they drift once the conversation starts moving. Genuine interest creates physical pull. It's not something people decide to do. When someone is actually drawn in by you, by what you're saying, by how you make them feel, by the specific electricity of real attraction, their body responds to it the same way a plant responds to light. Gradually, continuously, without announcement. Their shoulders rotate towards you by degrees. Their weight shifts forward. The space between you quietly closes over the course of minutes, and neither person has made a conscious decision to close it. That migration is the signal, not a dramatic lean across the table, not something you could point to in a single frozen moment. The slow, cumulative drift of someone who doesn't realize they're moving because they're too busy being interested to notice. When the interest isn't real, when someone is present but not pulled, engaged but not attracted, the body stays static. There's a quality to it, a kind of careful maintenance of distance, like the space between you is being held at exactly the right temperature. Warm enough to be polite, cool enough to keep the boundary intact. She might laugh. She might ask follow-up questions. She might do everything that content readers mistake for interest. But she won't move. And that stillness, underneath all the right words, is the truth of the interaction. Most guys don't realize this. She can fake a compliment. She's been doing it since she was a teenager. She can fake engagement, fake curiosity, fake warmth. But she cannot fake a lean. The body doesn't take direction from social obligation. It takes direction from something older and more honest than that. Daniel started watching for this in every interaction, and the first few times he applied it, the results were disorienting because it reordered everything he thought he knew. The woman he'd been texting for 2 weeks, the one who always responded with enthusiasm, always had something to say. When he watched her body in person, she never closed. She was warm and she was still, and those two things together meant something very specific. The warmth was real. The attraction wasn't. And then there was a different interaction. A woman he'd almost written off because she was quieter, less verbally expressive, the kind of person who didn't fill silence with performance. But he watched her body, and she was moving the whole time, subtly, continuously. By the end of the conversation, she was half a foot closer than when it started, and she hadn't noticed, and he almost hadn't either. That's the one that mattered, and he nearly missed it completely. This is what changes when you stop measuring interest by volume, by how much she says, how enthusiastically she responds, how many messages she sends, and start measuring it by proximity, by whether the space between you is shrinking or holding. The men who read this signal correctly stop chasing performances and start recognizing pull, and those are two completely different experiences. The micro lean is the one to watch for in the moment, not the full forward shift. That's obvious. Anyone can see that. The micro lean is the inch forward when you say something that lands. The slight tilt of the head when you go somewhere unexpected in the conversation. The almost imperceptible closing of distance in the pause after something real gets said. It lasts half a second. It's not repeated. Most men are so busy thinking about their next line that they miss it entirely. But it's worth more than an hour of good conversation, because it's not something she chose to give you. It's something that happened because she couldn't help it. The question Daniel stopped asking was, what does she think of me? That question sends you into your head, into performance mode, into the anxious loop of monitoring her responses for signs of approval. It makes you worse in the interaction and blind to the actual signal. The question he replaced it with was cleaner, and it had a binary answer. Is she moving toward me or staying still? That's it. That's the whole read. Everything else is noise, and once you train your attention to track that one thing, not obsessively, not in a way that pulls you out of the conversation, just as a background awareness running underneath everything else, you stop being blindsided. Because the body told you the truth 20 minutes ago, you just finally learned to listen to it. Most men are tracking what gets said. This sign lives in what doesn't. It's subtle enough that you can sit across from someone for hours and never catch it if you're not looking. But once you know what it is, you'll see it constantly, in every conversation with every person. And you'll realize it's been happening your whole life without you registering it once. Here's what to watch for. Someone starts a sentence, gets 2, maybe 3 words in, and then something happens. A small hesitation, a redirect, a quiet retreat. The thought that was coming gets pulled back before it arrives. Sometimes she'll name it. I was going to say, actually, never mind. Sometimes it's just a trail off, a subject change, a sudden interest in something across the room. The sentence disappears and a different one takes its place. And if you weren't paying attention, you'd think the conversation just moved naturally. It didn't move naturally. Something got stopped. That stoppage is one of the most honest signals a person can give you, because it means their real self showed up at the door, assessed the situation, and decided not to come in. Whatever was about to be said was true enough, or vulnerable enough, or revealing enough that the conscious mind caught it and pulled it back. And the reason it gets pulled back is always the same. They're not sure you're safe enough to receive it yet. This is what Daniel started noticing once he knew to look for it. He was in a conversation with a woman he'd been seeing for a few weeks, and he caught it. She started to say something, stopped herself mid-sentence, redirected. He almost glossed over it the way he always had, but this time he stayed with it. He didn't push her on it. He just registered it, filed it. It happened again 20 minutes later. Different topic, same pattern. Start, stop, redirect. And then he did something uncomfortable. He turned the lens on himself. And he realized he hadn't self-interrupted around her once in weeks. He was saying everything, sharing freely, opening up without hesitation, giving her the unedited version of himself without checking whether she'd earned it yet. He was already in, already exposed, already further down the road emotionally than the dynamic actually warranted. She was still self-interrupting, which meant she wasn't. That gap between where he was and where she was, that's not a communication problem, not a timing problem, not something that more good conversations would close. That's the gap that explains every "I just don't feel a spark" conversation he'd ever had. He'd been walking into emotional territory alone and calling it connection. You've probably done this before. You're in a conversation and something real is about to come out of your mouth and you catch yourself and you think, "I don't know how they'll take this. I don't know if this is too much." And you redirect. You say something safer. The real thing stays inside. That's not weakness. That's the intelligence of the nervous system protecting itself from exposure before trust has been established. She's running the same calculation. Every self-interrupt is her nervous system doing the math and deciding the answer isn't yes yet, and that tells you something precise. Not that she dislikes you, not that the connection isn't there at all, but that whatever trust threshold needs to be crossed before she lets the real version of herself into the room, you haven't crossed it yet. The mistake most men make when they understand this is they try to fix it by encouraging her to open up. They ask more questions. They go deeper. They signal with words that they're safe, that she can tell them anything, that they won't judge. And that almost never works, because trust isn't built through invitation. It's built through time and through her watching how you handle what she does give you. You cannot talk someone into trusting you faster than they're ready to. What you can do is track the pattern. A single self-interrupt means almost nothing on its own. People redirect thoughts for dozens of reasons, but a pattern of self-interrupts consistently across multiple conversations on topics that have emotional weight. That pattern is information. It's telling you exactly where the threshold is and how close to it she's operating. And if you compare that pattern to your own, if you notice that you've stopped self-interrupting while she hasn't, you now have an accurate map of the emotional asymmetry in the dynamic. That map is valuable not because it tells you to give up or push harder, but because it tells you the truth. And the truth lets you make real decisions instead of hopeful ones. Daniel didn't become a better reader of people by finding ways to accelerate trust or close the gap faster. He became better by getting honest about where the gap actually was. Because the alternative, continuing to invest at a level the other person hasn't matched, continuing to open up to someone who's still deciding whether to come in, that's not connection. That's just loneliness with better company. Pay attention to what she doesn't say. The half sentence that got swallowed. The thought that started and then quietly disappeared. Those moments are her showing you something more honest than anything she's managed to put into words yet. She's showing you where she is, and where she is right now is still deciding. The question is whether you're paying close enough attention to know it. There's a difference between someone who enjoys your company and someone who carries you with them. Most men never learn to tell the two apart, and that confusion, that specific recurring confusion, is responsible for more wasted months, more misread dynamics, more "I thought we had something" conversations than almost anything else in dating. Because enjoying your company in the moment is easy. It costs nothing. It requires no investment, no thought, no space made in the interior life of another person. You can be genuinely entertaining, genuinely engaging, genuinely good to be around, and still occupy exactly zero real estate in someone's head the moment you leave the room. The callback is the signal that separates those two things with surgical precision. Here's what it looks like. You're in a conversation, and she references something you said, not from earlier that evening, not from an hour ago when it's still fresh and easy to retrieve, but from last week, from a passing comment you made in a conversation you'd half forgotten. You mentioned something about your brother. Did that ever work out? Or she brings up a place you'd said you wanted to try, or a thought you'd shared offhandedly that you didn't think landed anywhere in particular. She's folded it back into the conversation like it was hers to keep. That one moment contains more information than 3 hours of good chemistry, because here's what it actually proves. You were in her head when you weren't in the room. She was living her normal life, going to work, talking to other people, moving through her days, and something you said was still running in the background. It had enough weight to stick, enough significance to surface later, unprompted, without her even necessarily realizing she'd been holding on to it. That doesn't happen by accident, and it doesn't happen with everyone. Daniel had never once tracked this signal. He'd been so locked into the performance of each individual conversation. Did it go well? Did she seem interested? Did he say the right things? That he'd never looked at what happened after. He didn't know who remembered him. He hadn't thought to check. When he started checking, the pattern was ruthless. The women he'd been most convinced were interested, the ones who were most responsive in the moment, most engaged, most verbally expressive. Almost none of them called back. He'd show up to the next conversation and they'd start fresh. No thread carried forward, nothing retained. Every interaction was its own sealed unit. He was entertaining, he wasn't memorable. And there's a significant difference between those two things. Then there was a woman he'd been spending time with but had mentally filed as something casual. She wasn't the most expressive person. She didn't fill conversations with enthusiasm, but she remembered everything. Things he'd mentioned weeks ago. Small details he'd shared without emphasis. She'd bring them back into the conversation naturally, without making a thing of it. And Daniel had been receiving those callbacks for months without understanding what they were. He'd been reading the loudest signal instead of the truest one. Most guys don't realize this. She is telling you exactly how much space you occupy in her inner life. Not with declarations, not with how enthusiastically she texts back, with what she carries forward, with what sticks. The callback is involuntary in that sense. Nobody sits down and decides to remember the small things someone said. Things stick because they matter, because the person they came from matters, because the mind keeps returning to them in idle moments without being asked to. When someone callbacks consistently, they're not doing you a favor. They're revealing something they may not have even said out loud to themselves yet. And the inverse is equally true. If you've been in consistent contact with someone for weeks, and she never once references anything you've said before, if every conversation starts from zero, if your words leave no residue, that's a signal too. It doesn't mean she dislikes you, but it means you're not taking up space. You're a pleasant experience she moves through and then moves on from. And no amount of better conversation, no amount of more charm or more depth or more effort will manufacture retention that isn't organically there. This is the signal that forced Daniel to stop judging investment by how good he felt after talking to someone. That metric was completely compromised. He felt good because he was good at conversations. That had nothing to do with what was happening on the other side. The cleaner metric, the honest one, is what gets carried forward. Not highlights, not big emotional moments, the small things, the throwaway details, the offhand comments that a person had no obligation to retain but did anyway, because you were in their head, quietly, in the days between seeing you. That's retention, and retention is rare. When you find it, don't mistake it for ordinary. Most people you'll meet will enjoy you and forget you with equal ease. The person who keeps bringing you back into the room even after you've left, who hands you your own words weeks later like she's been keeping them safe. That person has already told you something significant. You just have to be paying attention when she does. Stop measuring how good the conversation felt. Start measuring what she remembers when it's over. Because interest in the moment is cheap. Anyone can be engaged for an hour. but the mind only holds on to what it values. And if she's holding on to you, in the details, in the small things, in the quiet callbacks that slip out naturally, then you're not just someone she enjoys. You're someone she thinks about. And that is a completely different thing. Most people will do almost anything to avoid a real moment, not because they're shallow, not because they don't want depth, but because real moments require you to stop performing, and most people don't know who they are when the performance stops. So the moment a conversation starts to move towards something heavier, something honest, something unresolved, something that doesn't have a comfortable landing, the instinct kicks in. Change the subject, make a joke, ask a question that pulls the room back towards safer ground. The redirect is so fast, so automatic, that most people don't even notice they're doing it. What you're looking for is the person who doesn't. Daniel had a habit he didn't know was a habit. The moment a conversation went quiet, he filled it. Immediately. Without thinking. A joke, an observation, a new thread to pull. Anything to keep the interaction moving, to prevent the silence from becoming something he'd have to sit inside of. He thought he was being good company. He thought silence was a failure state, a sign that the energy had dropped, that he needed to rescue the moment before it died. He was wrong, and that mistake was costing him more than he realized. What silence actually is, real silence, the kind that falls naturally in the middle of something genuine, is the room that real things live in. It's what appears when two people have said something true and are letting it exist between them without rushing to cover it up. It's not empty. It's full. It's just full of something that doesn't make noise. The person who can hold that silence, who doesn't flinch from it, doesn't perform into it, doesn't treat it as a problem to be solved, that person is signaling something important. They're signaling that they're actually there, not there to be entertained or to entertain, there to be present with whatever is actually happening. The discomfort hold is that signal in its clearest form. It's not just silence. It's the broader pattern of what someone does when a conversation stops being easy, when something real gets said and the air changes, when a topic comes up that has weight to it, that doesn't resolve cleanly, that requires someone to stay in uncertainty for a moment instead of escaping back to comfort. Most people exit. They redirect so smoothly you barely notice. The conversation just somehow ends up somewhere lighter, and neither person quite remembers how it got there, but some people stay. They let the silence be silence. They let the heavy thing sit there without immediately trying to lighten it. They stay present in the discomfort instead of managing it away. And that staying, that specific, quiet choice to remain, is one of the most honest things a person can show you, because it means they trust the space you're holding. It means they're not evaluating the interaction for how enjoyable it is. It means something in them has decided that whatever is happening between you is worth being uncomfortable for. And that decision doesn't come from politeness. It doesn't come from performance. It comes from somewhere real. Daniel tested this without meaning to. He was in a conversation that shifted. Something came up that was genuinely heavy. Something personal that didn't lend itself to a quick resolution. And for the first time in recent memory, he didn't feel it. He didn't know exactly why. He just let the silence happen and stayed inside it and waited. She stayed too. Not nervously, not in a way that suggested she was waiting for him to rescue the moment. She just sat in it with him, quietly. And after a minute, maybe longer, something shifted in her. Something in her posture, something in how she held herself. And then she said something she hadn't said before. Something true. Something that hadn't been available before the silence made space for it. I used to panic in those moments and say something stupid to fix them. Every time I did, I broke the thing that was starting to build, because what was starting to build needed the discomfort to exist in. It needed the pressure of not being resolved. The moment I relieved that pressure with a joke or a redirect, the real thing collapsed and the performance came back. and we were two people being good company again instead of two people actually meeting. The discomfort hold tells you two things at once. It tells you about her, whether she's capable of presence, whether she's there for the real thing, or just for the pleasant surface of you, whether she trusts the space enough to stay when it gets uncomfortable. A woman who redirects every time the conversation gets heavy is telling you something about her ceiling. That ceiling may be high enough for something enjoyable. It is not high enough for something real. And it tells you about the dynamic, specifically whether she feels safe enough with you to stop performing. Because the hold only happens when someone feels held. She won't stay in discomfort with a man she doesn't trust. She won't let silence exist with someone she's still auditioning for. The fact that she stays means something about how she experiences you. Not just who you are, but who you are to her in this specific dynamic, in this specific room. The man who can hold silence without flinching changes the quality of every interaction he has, not because silence is a tactic, but because it's a filter. It removes the performance from the equation and leaves only what's actually there. And what's actually there, in the person who stays, who holds the weight, who lets the real moment exist without rushing to escape it, is someone who's not just enjoying you. Someone who's actually with you. That's the difference. And it lives in the silence between sentences, in the pause after something true gets said, in the moment when everything goes quiet and you find out who stays. Everything covered so far has been about reading what's already in front of you. The lean, the self-interrupt, the callback, the discomfort hold. These are signals embedded in interaction, things you observe when you're already in the room together, already in the conversation, already sharing the same space. You have to be present to catch them. This one is different. This one happens when you're not there. The unprompted reach is exactly what it sounds like. She contacts you when there's no reason to. Not because you texted first and she's responding. Not because you sent something that needed a reply. Not because there was an open thread she was closing. She reaches from nothing. No setup, no obligation, no social contract requiring her to. Just a voice note out of nowhere. A song she heard that made her think of you. A meme that reminded her of something you said. 3 words. This made me think of you. Sent on a Tuesday afternoon when nothing happened to prompt it. That is not a casual gesture. That is someone choosing you in a moment when they had every option not to. She was living her life, moving through her day, and something surfaced. A thought, a memory, a small association. And instead of letting it pass the way people let most things pass, she picked up her phone and reached. She made you part of her day when her day gave her no reason to. The reason that matters so much is the same reason the callback matters, but more direct. The callback proves you were in her head. The unprompted reach proves she acted on it. It's one thing to think about someone. It's another to move toward them from that thought. That movement, small as it looks, a text, a voice note, a link, is a choice. And choices made without obligation are the only truly honest data points you have. Daniel didn't understand this until he did something uncomfortable. He went through his phone, not skimming, actually reading. He pulled up every conversation that mattered to him, every dynamic he'd been invested in, and he scrolled back through the last 30 messages. And he did one simple thing. He counted who reached first. The results were brutal. Almost every conversation had been him. Him initiating. Him finding a reason to text. Him sending the meme, asking the question, following up after a silence that had gone on too long. He'd been creating the conditions for contact so consistently, in so many conversations simultaneously, that he'd built a complete illusion of mutual investment. It felt like things were moving because things were always moving. He just hadn't noticed he was the only one moving them. He wasn't reading people. He was carrying them. And carrying someone is a particular kind of loneliness because it wears the costume of connection. You're talking. There's warmth. There's response. The interaction is real. But underneath it, if you strip away your own initiation, if you imagine going quiet for 2 weeks and see who surfaces, the silence tells you everything the conversation was hiding. Most guys don't realize this. You get so focused on demonstrating interest, on showing up, on being consistent and present and available, that you never stop to check whether any of it is moving in the other direction. You mistake your own effort for evidence of a dynamic. You confuse the fact that she responds warmly with the fact that she's equally invested. Those are different things. Responding warmly when someone reaches is basic social grace. Reaching when you don't have to, that's investment. The standard isn't high. That's what makes it so revealing. You're not looking for grand gestures. You're not looking for declarations. You're looking for a text on a random Wednesday. A song sent without explanation. A voice note that starts with nothing more than "I saw this and thought of you." Small things. Low effort, low stakes, completely voluntary things. If those aren't happening, if every point of contact originates from you, then the dynamic you're experiencing is something you've largely constructed. That's not a judgment. Most men do this. The investment feels genuine because the feelings are genuine, but feelings on your side don't create dynamics on hers. And continuing to carry someone who isn't reaching back isn't loyalty or patience. It's a refusal to read what's actually in front of you. Daniel sat with the audit for a long time, and then he did something most men won't do. He stopped initiating. Across several conversations simultaneously, he went quiet, not as a tactic, not to manufacture scarcity, just to see what was actually there when he removed his own effort from the equation. Some conversations died immediately. No reach, no follow-up, nothing. As if the connection had never existed beyond his willingness to maintain it. One conversation survived. She texted him 2 days in. Not about anything significant, just something she saw that made her think of him. 7 words. But those 7 words, unprompted, told him more about that specific dynamic than months of good conversations had. That's the one that's real. That's the one worth your time and your presence and your continued investment. The rest were performances he'd been funding alone. This is the signal that ends all doubt because it removes all ambiguity. The lean can be subtle. The self-interrupt can be misread. The callback can be explained away. But the unprompted reach has no alternative interpretation. She didn't have to. She chose to. That choice, in the absence of any obligation, is the clearest possible signal of where you actually stand. Stop measuring connection by how good you feel after talking to someone. Start measuring it by who picks up the phone when nothing made them have to, because that's the only reach that's real. Here's what nobody wants to hear after learning all of this. Reading people isn't the hard part. The hard part is what you do with what you see. Because once these signals are in your awareness, once you know what to look for in the lean, the self-interrupt, the callback, the silence, the reach, some dynamics that used to feel good will go quiet. Not because anything changed, because you finally stopped making noise for them. And you'll realize they were always quiet. You just weren't fluent enough to know it. Daniel didn't come out of this with a better strategy for winning women over. That's not what changed. What changed was his honesty about who was actually there, about where he'd been pouring time and energy and emotional investment into something that was never going to hold him the way he was holding it, about how much of what he'd called connection had actually just been effort. His effort, sustained alone, mistaken for something mutual. That's the real shift. Not read her better so you can get her. Read clearly so you stop losing yourself chasing people who were never actually present. The man who sees accurately doesn't need to chase. He doesn't need to decode or convince or manufacture reasons to stay engaged. He selects. He puts his energy where the signals are real, and he walks away, cleanly and without bitterness, from the places where they aren't. That kind of man doesn't wonder if she's interested. She's already told him. If this changed something in how you see things, subscribe, not as a favor. Because the next video goes somewhere most men are not ready to look. and you won't want to miss it.